And what is up, everyone? This is Rome once again. Welcome back to Treknically Speaking, where we speak to people about Trek. And I'm now talking to someone I came across a post, I believe on Instagram, and his name is Cajun Trekkie, as I was introduced to him on Instagram. And if you wouldn't mind, man, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm originally from Louisiana, from the heart of Acadiana, Cajun country. I joined the military in 1986, left home, retired in 2006, and came to Houston, Texas. Started working at NASA. I was the chief loadmaster for the Super Guppy aircraft. It's a pretty interesting airplane. It's only one flying in the world. I got a chance to work with the Constellation program, which Obama ended up shooting, and it became just the Orion program. But Artemis, um, I worked with Shuttle, ISS, basically anything that was space related, vehicle wise, I worked with. And because the Guppy's, like I said, is the largest aircraft in the world, the fattest. So we have a hole big enough to carry things other people can't, and it's been used all the way since the Apollo program. Not this specific one; they retired the one from the Apollo program, but we got this one. I don't know when it got there before I did. But I worked at NASA for 6 years, and I ended up getting hurt, and they medically retired me. And I moved up to Conroe, Texas, and just been enjoying life ever since. Watching as much Star Trek as I can.
Right, right. That's a quality way to pass the time. I think you've just afforded me though a rare opportunity because you actually sort of work in the proto, or I did work rather in the proto Starfleet realm, right? Um, I've always sort of wanted to know this, man. Like how much of Star Trek, when they start talking about the mechanics of it, is based on your work even remotely in line with like science fiction, or is it just like a lot of hand wavy stuff?
Well, it's kind of intermixed, to be honest with you. NASA, everybody I met at NASA actually enjoyed Star Trek. A lot of the people, it inspired them. And I didn't go into this, but it inspired me. I mean, from a young age. One of the reasons I joined the Air Force, and when I got the job to wear the blue flight suit, I wasn't an astronaut, but I got to wear the same flight suit they did. It was like a dream come true. But those guys, when you listen to the engineers at NASA and the guys working on the current space program, they're constantly asking themselves why we can't do what Star Trek has done. They're constantly working towards that. Like for going to Mars, I was talking to one of the engineers, and they discovered they call it a space superhighway. So, International Space Station, I think it goes around 13,000 miles an hour or something like that. Well, there's an area of space when they're heading towards Mars, they're supposed to be able to hit it and go infinite, just faster, much, much faster, which would help us get to Mars a lot quicker and make it be a more, doable thing. But I guess about a year before I was injured, I saw that some talking points, some papers, some briefings on an engineer talking about being able to do something equivalent to warp speed. And what they were looking at was being able to cause like a black hole in front of the ship, and it would basically jump in sections. And it's only theoretical. Well, at least it was. I remember retired from there for 12 years, so I don't know where they've gotten with it. But a lot of terminology, you'd be surprised. It's a clean operation. You ever notice that about Star Trek, right? It's a clean environment, especially if you ever go into a clean room. Everybody's bootied up, and it's all pretty serious. And but yeah, I mean, obviously the terminology is not the same, but you can see the level of professionalism and what they want to realize is kind of the same.
Man, that's I appreciate that insight. I'm gonna ask you something else. Sort of. Well, first I'll say that one of the issues that I always sort of found with Star Wars, is to me when it would get compared to Star Trek, they'd be like, "Oh, well, sci-fi fandoms," and I'm like, "Well, to me, Star Wars is more like space fantasy. Like it's not really, sci-fi." And my argument would be, okay, let's look at the thing that they've used practically from Star Trek and what has been invented that they've used practically from Star Wars, right? And I'm like, you can look at like the iPad. I'm sure Apple will never admit it, but like they called it a pad. Like, you know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? You can look at like communicators, like all sorts of stuff, and we found these practical applications in our world for them. So to me, that's why Star Trek would always sort of stand above. But what I was going to ask is, with the recent hearings about UFOs and such, and you being affiliated with NASA and obviously liking Star Trek, like, were you surprised by any of the stuff they were saying, or did you even like give it much attention?
I I'm not surprised by it, but then again, I come from the theory of we'd have to be pretty small-minded to believe God couldn't make us and make somebody else. You know, that's my general theory on it. I definitely believe there are people out there, and I believe we made contact with them a long time ago. That's my personal feeling on it. But you never really heard much about it at NASA. They just didn't talk about it. I don't know if it was just taboo speak or what. I don't know. Um, I do want to go back to your Star Trek, Star Wars though, and Star Wars to me was always there's always conflict. Even though Star Trek had conflict, but they always wanted to do things better. They always wanted to try and make first contact in a better way. And Star Wars, it was just that shoot first, ask questions later. And I I don't know. I don't see a whole lot of similarities between Star Trek and Star Wars. They're just two completely different genres to me. They're both sci-fi, but not they're not the same. Same but different. Is that right?
Right. I get your meaning. I get your meaning. So with that stated, with that said, I guess we'll start with the technically speaking part of this presentation.
Sure.
What is your first like Trek memory, or like what is the first cognizant like, oh, that's Star Trek that you can think of?
Um, I don't remember the episode. I think I told you this when you asked me to do this. I don't remember episode names real well. Um, but it was early on when the it was TOS, the original series, where they had the people with the big heads. You could see the veins and whatnot, the big brain dudes. And later I found out there was a woman, I think, in at least one of those. And I remember
Right,
seeing that.
right.
And the whole thing with Spock, it's just the Star Trek in general, the flying vehicle, all that just man, it just made me think of what's possible, right? Of course, I was born in 68. So I grew up at the time where, what was that? Popular Mechanics magazine was still showing on the back page, we're going to have flying cars and flying this and flying that. And seeing the program made me think that could be possible. We're still not there yet, but it made me think that could be possible. And it just impacted me big time.
Okay. And you're speaking of the Telosians, and that's really one of the more iconic episodes of Trek. You sort of get the interaction with Spock and Pike, and we hadn't really been introduced to Pike at that point. He was in the pilot, and then of course when it went to actually series order, Kirk was captain. So it was
Yeah.
always sort of like, oh, what happened? And then of course, TOS goes on to have the famous episode where they show them. But yeah, that's the Telosian. So yeah, that's a really iconic episode. Sort of going with the theme of the older shows. Have you watched any of Strange New Worlds or Discovery?
I watched them all. I've watched every Star Trek ever made, mainstream. Now, there's a lot of fan stuff out there. I've caught a little bit of it on YouTube, and actually, some of it's pretty good. Again, I couldn't tell you the exact titles and whatnot, but I've watched them all. And to be honest with you, I really like A Strange New Worlds. I enjoyed big time. I like the Pike character in it. Um, I love the ship. It's amazing. Discovery, it took me a minute to get into Discovery. It took me a few episodes at least, maybe even the first season, but I really learned to embrace Discovery. And it kind of made me wonder when you start watching it, you're like, okay, well, they got all this technology. What happened to it? But you learn later on, that it was basically lost. I mean, they jumped from one century to another, and it just, I guess it never went back, or maybe I just don't remember. I didn't see that, but it was lost that way, is my understanding. And somebody's probably going to argue me on this, or probably laugh at me for saying that, but that was my understanding. That technology of the spores was lost when they jumped, right?
Yes, yes. And basically they went out of their way to try to sort of erase it from knowledge of general Starfleet. So like if you have a special clearance or something like that, you might be able to find it. But the way I took it was that this is like, section 31 level top secret, like no one will ever know about it, which is something that I find sort of humorous too when you do watch Strange New Worlds and Disco. Is everyone seems to know about Section 31, but then when we get to Deep Space Nine, somehow they've managed to go underground to the point that no one even like they're just a whisper of a rumor.
Yeah.
Um, I found that very interesting. Let me ask you this, since we're sort of talking about Discovery and Strange New Worlds. Um, excuse me, a lot of people are of the opinion or have the theory that this is actually not the same Trek universe that we would end up seeing displayed in, say, Picard season 1 or Picard season 2. Do you sort of jive with that, or are you just like, different people tell the story differently, but this is the same universe, this is the same timeline?
I don't know. The timeline thing. I've watched people argue about this in the forum, not the forums, but the comments, either there or on some of the Facebook forums I'm in, and I just enjoy Star Trek for what it is. I really don't try and say, well, that just doesn't follow canon or whatever. And I just enjoy it for what it is. Now it will aggravate me at times, but in general, I just leave it alone. Now, Picard, again, it might make people upset. I never really enjoyed the Next Generation that much. There are parts of it I like, but some of the writing, and I don't know what happened during some seasons, but it was really just, what was the point? And when I do rewatch it now, I just skip over some episodes. I just skip them. Um, but Picard, I thought was very well done. The Picard series, the 3 season series, I thought that was very well done. Um, but I didn't like Jean-Luc Picard so much in the Next Generation. It got a little bit better as the seasons went on, but yeah, it was difficult for me. And maybe, I don't know, maybe it was a time in my life, I don't know. But I found the aged and the more mature Picard later on in the Picard series to be a far better man, better captain. Well, of course, he wasn't a captain; he was a uh, admiral at the time, which, of course, they dismissed him because of the little incursion he had. But still, I liked him better than I preferred the Picard that he played in the Next Generation.
Speaking of that, like, well, first of all, that is definitely a highly controversial take. I can't lie. Like, you never hear anyone say anything bad about the blessed TNG. So that's sort of refreshing. But I think the first season, I want to say maybe at the end of the first season, going into the second season, somewhere along there was a writer strike. And
Uh,
so Paramount tried to get around the writer strike by taking old TOS scripts and just like, changing out characters. I think like the Naked Now from the first season would be an example of that, which infamously where Tasha Yar and Data have this, you know,
yeah,
where he's fully
he's fully
functional.
functional.
Um, yeah, 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 right, right. And then they also took, it was a Star Trek Phase 2 show they tried to do that never went to actual shooting. And they took some spec scripts from that and also repurposed them for TNG to try to avoid the writer's strike. But that is true. That's why, like, a lot of times in the forums and stuff, they'll say like, "Oh, that's when TNG grew the beard," meaning like if Riker has a beard, it's probably a decent, season. If
Mhm.
Riker doesn't have a beard, you might want to just hold off on that.
I,
So I mean,
I
yeah,
always
like,
liked Riker better. Riker, I thought he was a great character.
well, and Riker was supposed to be like that time period's version of Kirk, right?
Mhm.
He was supposed to be like more of the swashbuckler, where Picard was supposed to be the elder statesman.
Mhm. He was uptight. Picard was uptight. I mean, even like the first episode or very early when oh, what's his name? The kid is escaping me right now. Doctor's son.
Wesley Crusher.
Wesley, thank you. When Wesley was in the elevator and he's like, "Don't show it on the flight on the deck there." Anyway, he was just so uptight about it, and I was like, it rubbed me wrong. And you know what? It may be because at that time I was at a different place in my world. I was in the military. It was very strict there, and maybe that just rubbed me wrong from that aspect. So I have a different experience when I watched it because I did 20 years in the military. So um, maybe it's because he came across kind of as a drill sergeant to me. Does that make sense?
No, no, it makes total sense. And that's one of the things they sort of talk about too, is how um Patrick Stewart himself sort of had this general aloofness when they first started filming, because he was like saying his agent literally told him like anything that's like a updated reboot is gonna fail. So just take the job, take the paycheck. It's only gonna get one season. So so he's like he was of the mindset like pretty much this is the job. I don't really need to get any connection to these people because this is about to be over.
Yeah.
And you can really tell, like, and I'm sure the writing, obviously got a little bit better, but like he really does have this general aloofness that, is that art imitating life or life imitating art? Who knows? But then over the course of the series, you see where, Picard actually becomes like integrated as a actual member of this group instead of like someone above this group. And then of course the final episode culminating in him actually taking part in playing poker with them, which is supposed to sort of be the egalitarian, like, we're all the same here. Like I can
Yeah.
play cards with you guys type relatable thing. Which I mean, hey man, he definitely is an iconic Star Trek character. And I almost feel like he sort of had to play Picard a certain way to escape the Kirk shadow. He had to sort of be subdued where Kirk would have been over the top and
Yeah.
you know, so I get it. I get it. So you aren't enamored with TNG. Do you have a specific Trek that you could say definitively, like, this is my favorite Trek?
My favorite is probably Enterprise. I Man, I think Scott Bakula did a great job myself. I love that series, and I never thought it got the kudos and the accolades it should have gotten. Um, I think they did a great job with it. The story it tells, they were, of course, they took place before Kirk. They were the first ship to leave our galaxy, and they were out there doing things. I mean, he was essentially the John Wayne of the whole situation. It hadn't been done, so he was writing the book as it was happening, and I just enjoyed it. Plus, they had a lot, man. They had a lot of confrontation in that show, and there was a lot on the line. My God! Of course, back in the Next Generation, of course, they had the Borg. But at the time, I forget the species they were dealing with, but
The
that was a
Zindi?
huge the Zindi. Thank you. That was a huge. I mean, what it was like 3 or 5 different types of Zindi. I think it was 4, and the fifth one had already been killed off. Is that right?
You had the aquatics, the reptilians, the
Yep.
insectoids, the water one,
Yep. And there was a
the mammalians, and then the avians had died off because when
okay.
their planet got destroyed, the avians, since they could fly, were the only ones that had not developed the technology to leave the planet.
Yeah. Yeah. I just thought I thought the story was told rather. Of course, they had a couple of bad uh, uh, writings too, and one of the ones I never did like, and several series have done it, but it was the Bizarro world, where they were an evil
The
empire.
mirror universe.
Yeah, the mirror. I never liked any of those series. I just couldn't stand them. Um, I don't know why they did them, but for whatever it's worth, I think at the first time I watched it, it was okay. But every time I've come across a series from here out, I just skip over that episode. It just doesn't do it for me. Um,
I,
but
I almost guarantee you with TOS, it was probably like a how can we make a really cheap episode?
yeah,
You know what I'm saying? So it's like, oh man, we'll just use the fact, yeah, we'll just put mustaches on them. Now they're back. Yeah, cool.